In this presentation, we will discuss some of the composers and performers of the classical style period. During the classical period, there were three composers working in Vienna known as the Viennese school, or I sometimes like to refer to them as the big three of the classical period. These composers were Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. While there were other composers at the time, including several of J.S. Bach's sons, W.F. Bach, C.P.E. Bach, and J.C.F. Bach, we are going to primarily focus on the composers of the Viennese school in this presentation. Franz Joseph Haydn was one of the most prolific composers of the classical era. He was influenced musically at an early age by the folk songs and dances of his hometown of Rohrau, a small village in Austria. He had a beautiful voice as a child and became a singer for St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna until his voice changed at the age of 16. He settled in Vienna and earned a living teaching and accompanying. He eventually attracted the attention of the Viennese aristocracy and at the age of 29 entered the service of the Esterházy family, a very wealthy family of Hungarian princes known for their patronage of the arts. He remained in their service for 30 years and had under his direction an orchestra, an opera company, a marionette theater, and a chapel. His duties included composing music for the family, conducting the orchestra, coaching singers, and overseeing the instruments and music library. There were usually 2 concerts, 2 opera performances, and daily chamber concerts every week. Upon the Esterházy prince's death, he made 2 visits to London where he was well received. He died in 1809 and was acknowledged throughout Europe as the premier musician of his time. Haydn was a pioneer in developing the symphony and string quartet, influencing both Mozart and Beethoven. His music is robust, direct, uses lively rhythms and vivid contrast, and often has a folk flavor or reflects his love of nature. He was such a master at developing themes that he could build a whole movement upon one theme, but still create plenty of contrast through the texture, rhythm, dynamics, and orchestration. Haydn is well known for his large number of string quartets that were composed out of necessity. He had been invited to participate in a chamber ensemble that only had 2 violinists and a cellist during the summer of 1757. He became the violist, and many consider that to be when the string quartet form was born. Franz Joseph Haydn wrote over 100 symphonies in the 4-movement structure, thus he earned the nickname Father of the Symphony. His most famous symphonies were a set of 12 works commissioned for a concert series in London after his service in Esterházy had come to a close. He also composed many piano sonatas, piano trios, divertimentos, concertos, operas, and masses. He was very innovative and disliked compositional rules, which made his output filled with variety. Listen to Haydn's Emperor Quartet, Opus 76, No. 3, Movement 2. Born in Salzburg, Austria, to a musical family, Mozart was an amazing child prodigy. He could play the harpsichord and violin, improvise fugues, write minuets, and sight read perfectly by the age of 6. At 8, he wrote a symphony. At 11, an oratorio. At 12, an opera. He was continuously on tour with his father, a court musician, between the ages of 6 and 15. He returned to Salzburg at the age of 15, but the archbishop disliked his music and only granted him a subordinate seat in the court orchestra. He tried to find another position for 10 years, but was unsuccessful. At 25, he left and became a freelance musician in Vienna. Wolfgang Mozart moved to Vienna at the age of 25, after his dismissal by the Archbishop of Salzburg. He struggled financially because he did not have a steady income provided by a patron. In 1782, he married his landlord's daughter, Constanze Weber, against his father's wishes. He reached the peak of his career in the late 1780s with his 3 comic operas, which were a result of collaboration with librettist Lorenzo da Ponte. His health declined, though he continued to produce masterpieces such as his clarinet concerto and final opera, The Magic Flute, in 1791. He began the composition of a Requiem Mass that was commissioned by a count. He had a notion that he would not live to finish the Requiem Mass. He died on December 4th, 1791 at the age of 35, and the requiem was left unfinished. Possible causes of death include rheumatic fever, heart disease, and trichinosis. Mozart is known for his simple, elegant, and tuneful melodies. His instrumental music conveyed a range of moods from dramatic to lively and playful. Like Haydn, Mozart favored the string quartet. Mozart was also one of the most outstanding pianists of his time. He wrote many works for the piano and more than 40 symphonies. He produced his most successful operas with Lorenzo da Ponte, who was the librettist for The Marriage of Figaro and Don Giovanni. Vienna loved The Marriage of Figaro. The city of Prague loved Don Giovanni. It was written for the Prague Opera, but it was not as well received in Vienna. Mozart found success again in the last year of his life with his comic opera, The Magic Flute. The success was too late since he died shortly after its premiere. He is generally considered a master of opera. He had an unusual ability to coordinate music and stage action and create characters through tone. His operas tend to include both humorous and serious characters. Mozart wrote more than 20 operas in different genres: opera buffa, Italian comic opera, opera seria, Italian serious opera, and Singspiel, a lighter form of German opera that included spoken dialogue. Listen to the overture from Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro now, and other works will be discussed in the next presentation. Mozart's music was catalogued chronologically by Ludwig Köchel. Works are listed with a K followed by a number. The chronology of Mozart's music is being revised continuously. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in Bonn, Germany, into a troubled family situation. As his father was prone to alcoholism, he was required from the age of 11 to support his mother and two younger brothers by performing as an organist and harpsichordist. At the age of 17, he played for Mozart in Vienna, improvising so well that Mozart said to his friends, "Keep an eye on him. He will make a noise in the world someday." Beethoven moved to Vienna before his 22nd birthday to study with Haydn. Though his studies were not very successful, Beethoven received much praise from the aristocracy. 3 noblemen committed to provide him with an annual income in 1809, with the one condition that he stay in Vienna. This arrangement was unusual because Beethoven was never actually in the service of the Viennese aristocracy. Instead, he made extra fees from piano lessons, concerts, and selling his compositions. Beethoven was somewhat of a contradiction in his personal life. For example, he claimed high moral principles, yet was unscrupulous in dealing with publishers. At the age of 29, Beethoven felt the first symptoms of deafness. His doctors could do nothing to halt his hearing loss. This was an extreme emotional crisis for Beethoven. His works after this time are different with a new power and heroism. As his hearing weakened, he had to stop performing in public. Though he conducted for longer, he finally had to give that up also. In his later years, he had to communicate with an ear trumpet and/or writing in notebooks that he carried. Some of his greatest works, like the Ninth Symphony, were composed during a creative outburst after 1818 while he was completely deaf. His infirmity brought a sense of isolation to the composer, and his personality became that of an eccentric genius. A ride in an open carriage during severe weather brought on an attack of edema that was ultimately fatal. He died at the age of 57 at the height of his fame and reverence. Beethoven's compositional activity falls into 3 periods. The first was reflective of the classical influence of composers such as Haydn and Mozart. The middle period saw experimentation with elements more associated with the 19th century Romantic era. Beethoven's late works used more chromatic harmonies and were stripped of conventions that were non-essential to his expressive intent. Beethoven's music was not mere entertainment, but a moral force, a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy. Beethoven bridges the classical and romantic eras with his early work showing Mozart and Haydn's influences, and innovations from other works continued to be used by later composers. Beethoven's most popular works are the 9 symphonies that use a larger orchestra than had been used previously. Each symphony is unique, but the odd-numbered tended to be forceful, while the even-numbered tended to be more calm and lyrical. He wrote 32 piano sonatas that draw new effects from the newly improved piano. His 16 string quartets and 5 piano concertos are also considered remarkable. Though focused more on instrumental music, he did write vocal music, including 2 masses and 1 opera Fidelio. Listen to the first movement of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. It was considered proper for noble and upper middle class women to study music during this time. Many became highly skilled amateurs. Some were able to make a living as music teachers or professional performers. 3 women in particular stand out as performers in this era. Maria Anna Mozart, known as Nanner I, Mozart's sister, who toured extensively with her brother in her childhood, performing concertos and 4-hand piano works. When she retired from performing to raise a family, Mozart wrote several works for her and would send his piano cadenzas for her to try out. Maria Theresa von Paradis was a blind pianist and organist and a friend of Mozart. She retained in her memory at least 60 different concertos that she prepared for an extended European tour. She was also a composer, but many of her works have been lost. Barbara von Pleuer was a student of Mozart for whom Mozart wrote 2 concertos. Mozart was so proud of her that he invited other composers to hear her and bragged about her to his father. This concludes this presentation. Please proceed to the classical music presentation.